Hello, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Ricky Show 2. Welcome to the second ever episode of the Tag Podcast. Renzo isn't here this episode. I'm just alone. He's off on a little hiatus. He should be, hopefully, I hope, back on the next episode. So, I'd like to thank everyone so much for the support on the last episode. Me and Renzo do really appreciate the support, even though it has been a month. So, we've decided together, me and Renzo, that we are going to be making tag podcast episodes every single month, so that way we have enough stuff to talk about, and hopefully, we hope you have enough stuff to talk about within a 20-minute time frame. So, I'd like to thank everyone once again for the support on the last episode. Is why I'm making the second episode in the first place. So I'm really sorry it has been a month, but that's just what we decided. That's going to be every month. So in the next episode, you guys will see in May. Now, it will be Wednesdays every single month. So let's just get right into it with our first. Let me take a quick drink of water before we get into this here. Okay, so our first topic that I wanted to talk about is the Nintendo Switch. Now, in the first episode, we talked about the Nintendo Switch, but that was, of course, before the initial entire launch of the Nintendo Switch, and now we know a lot more about the Nintendo Switch. So, in the first episode, we didn't really talk about the specs of the Nintendo Switch, and that's what I wanted to quickly talk about first of all. So, the Nintendo Switch has an Nvidia Tegra. If you guys do not know who Nvidia is or what Nvidia is a company that produces graphics cards, mainly graphics cards. They also do a bunch of other stuff. So, yeah, if you don't know what graphics cards are, take a look. If you have a desktop PC, if your computer has a graphics card, it's basically a gigantic square that helps. It's like a gigantic square rectangle that you plug into your motherboard, and it increases graphics capacity than what your CPU, depending on which CPU you have, of course, can provide. This gives more power, and Nvidia produces one of the best and most powerful graphics cards on the market. So, the Nintendo Switch uses a version of Nvidia Tegra, and I like to appreciate Nintendo on this because instead of relying on making their own GPU, they decide to use one of the most popular companies and one of the best companies for graphics cards and use it on their console, and it works pretty well for the Nintendo Switch and its causes. So, the Nvidia Tegra is part of the Nvidia Shield. It's why it was created. The Nvidia Shield is Nvidia's set-top box for gaming. Imagine basically a Steam box, but by Nvidia, and it can play Steam games, it can play a bunch of other games, it connects online. It's a pretty cool, cheap set-top box if you guys want to play like PC games on your TV. If you guys are interested in something like that, go check it out. Like I said, it has an Nvidia Tegra in that. So what Nintendo decided to do for the new Nintendo Switch consoles, they decided to take that Nvidia Tegra and customize a little bit, tweak it up a little bit, and use it for their own console. Now, they probably didn't overclock it. Overclocking means make certain parts more powerful. So CPU or processor in your computer, you could overclock that to make it more powerful, but that gives off more heat. So I don't think they overclock that because heat is a very huge thing for such a small console. Anyway, the Nintendo Switch, its launch was a bit interesting. The launch, of course, had its problems. It didn't. My Nintendo Switch personally hasn't had any issues other than the screen scratching issue that pretty much everyone has nowadays. People have had issues with graphics. People have had issues with their strap. They put it upside down, which is kind of their fault, to be honest. I mean, it's clearly labeled which way to put it in. But people have issues with their left Joy-Con disconnecting. I personally haven't had any of these issues, but if I did, I probably would have mentioned my story with them and how these works. But I guess I was lucky to be, out of the millions of consoles sold, to be one with a good one compared to the hundreds of people that have some sort of issues. So that brings me to, a lot of people are talking about, like, why did you buy a console when it was first released? And the thing is, the console itself, most of the units that have been sold aren't that bad. There's a handful of people that sure have issues, and that doesn't mean that there's going to be a huge recall because the Nintendo Switches do not function correctly. A lot of the consoles still work perfectly fine and work perfectly fine for YouTubers. I've seen a bunch of YouTubers haven't even complained about their Nintendo Switch. So, I don't have any complaints. I love the console and the screen scratching issues. I kind of hate how they had to put in a plastic screen, but hey, cost cutting for such a small console. So, that brings me to post-launch. This thing, let's actually check how many units this thing sold. So, let's see. Let's see how many Nintendo Switches have been sold. Switches have been sold. So, it is, according to the news, if this can load, it has been about 100 million units sold. Which, according to this article, Business Insider, for anyone wondering, it has sold already 100 million copies, which is why it went out of the market very quickly. So the Nintendo Switch, its launch has been great, and everything's been great for the Nintendo Switch. Okay, so I think that's it talking about the Nintendo Switch for now. We've talked about it for 2 episodes straight. So now let's move on to our next topic, and I wanted to talk about AMD, and of course I'm going to bring that back Nvidia into the mix. So let's talk about AMD first of all. For those of you that do not know what or who, for that matter, AMD is another processor company. They also do make graphics cards, but they're mainly for processors, so I'm just going to focus on that they're a processor company. So, Nvidia has been dropping on the market in recent years because of Intel. Intel has basically had no competition whatsoever because they've blown the CPU market out of the water with their amazing, super good CPUs. And I gotta admit, Intel CPUs are great. But recently, last month to be exact, AMD came back with something. They decided to finally try and bring back a lead and actually give Intel something to compete against. AMD introduced Ryzen, R-Y-Z-E-N, Ryzen. It is based off of their Zen architecture, which, for anyone wondering what architecture I'm talking about architectures for like processors, just kind of how they're built, how processors are built. These companies like Intel and AMD code name these architectures. So, for example, Intel's latest 7th generation processors are called Kaby Lake. That's their architecture, and that's kind of like their code name, and people just call them Kaby Lake. Their last one was Skylake, and then before that was, I think, Haswell. I'm pretty sure. But anyway, so as you can see, Intel also has code names for their 6th, 7th generation, all their generation CPUs. And their latest one is Kaby Lake. But now, what AMD has introduced is Ryzen with their Zen microarchitecture to try and beat the market and try and bring back AMD's name. They were somewhat successful. They actually did compete against Intel, and they did prove their point. But the problem is, some people have been complaining about the Ryzen slightly. Now, Ryzen's great. Of course, I haven't personally used it yet, but Ryzen looks great. It looks like successful for AMD, but people have been complaining that it's not that good for certain tasks. And of course, Intel, people have been saying that it's good for pretty much all these tasks. So people have been saying that Ryzen isn't good for something like gaming, and that it's better for something like workflow and productivity, while Intel's good at gaming and stuff and all the other productivity stuff. So as you can see, Ryzen is somewhat more of a competitor, and it could definitely compete. So Ryzen 7, as the current one has, okay, ready for this? 8 cores. Now, though, depending on what computer you're using, yours probably only has 4 cores, as that is pretty much the average cores for each CPU nowadays. Cores are basically power and how much power That's the easiest way to explain it, is basically how much power limit a CPU has. So 8 cores is how much AMD Ryzen has, which means it could do a lot of work. Intel, on the other hand, the most I think their i7 can support is 6 or maybe even 8. I'm pretty sure it's 6 though. So, Ryzen was proven a success somewhat, and now people are awaiting a rumored Ryzen 5 and Ryzen 3 chips, which are apparently going to be faster than the usual Ryzen 7, which is the ones that are currently out. So yeah, let's see what we find out about Ryzen 5 and Ryzen 3, maybe later on in the next coming months. So that brings us to Nvidia now. I wanted to talk about Nvidia. So, what have they been doing? So, of course, I mentioned Nvidia before for the Nvidia Tegra and the Nintendo Switch, but they did a little bit of a unwanted business practice that people didn't really like. So, it all started when Nvidia last year released the brand new Titan X Pascal. People dubbed it the Titan XP, like Windows XP, the operating system. So it was actually called the Titan X Pascal, but people call it the Titan XP. And for anyone wondering, the Titan series is Nvidia's most powerful graphics cards, GPU, on the market. So this is the most powerful, the best, the one that can deliver the most power, and it costs $1,000. That's right, you could buy a MacBook with that much money, or you could get a really powerful graphics card. So here it is, the launch of the Titan X Pascal, the $1,000 graphics card reunited and recreated with their Pascal microarchitecture for GPUs. So this brings us back to Kaby Lake and the Zen architecture, except now it's for GPUs, which is for graphics cards. It's their main circuit used for processing graphics, and they called it the Pascal for their latest one. It's why it's the Titan X Pascal. It all makes sense now, right? So later on, about last month or two, Nvidia also decided to release the brand new $700 1080 Ti. This is the GeForce GTX 1080 Ti. So before that, we just had a regular GeForce GTX 1080, and once again, these are all graphics cards. So the GeForce GTX 1080 Ti introduced a lot more CUDA cores, which is something you guys really shouldn't care about, and I do not want to bother explaining it. But it basically had more power than its predecessor, the GTX 1080. So what do we have? Oh yes, so now we have the GTX 1080 and GTX 1080 Ti. But the problem is, here we have the Nvidia Titan X Pascal, and the problem is the 1080 Ti, a $700 graphics card, is more powerful than a Titan XP, or should I say Titan X Pascal, a $1,000 graphics card. It blew everyone's minds. Basically, Nvidia screwed over their customers once already by basically charging for a $1,000 graphics card that in the end would be less powerful than a $700 graphics card. Think about it for a second. You just spend your money on a $1,000 graphics card, and a few days later you just find out that your $1,000 graphics card isn't worth as much as a $700 graphics card. What a deal. And of course that brings prices down for the GTX 1080 originals to $500. So if now you have cheaper options for your 1080s. But fast forward to recently, a few days ago, when Nvidia announced the brand new Titan XP. That's right, they removed the Titan X Pascal and just put in a lowercase p right next to an X. And that got everyone mad once again, because now they just basically revamped the entire Titan X Pascal, called it the Titan XP with a lowercase p, and once again, it's $1,000, and once again, it's more powerful than the original Titan X Pascal. So basically, you have the original Titan X Pascal that everyone calls the Titan XP, but the problem with the Titan XP isn't as powerful as the 1080 Ti, which is now everyone pretty much dubs the new Titan X. And then now we have the new Titan XP with the lowercase p that's more powerful than either of those. So basically, Nvidia screwed their customers over twice in a row. One, by spending $1,000 on a graphics card that was less powerful than a $700 graphics card, and then a day ago releasing a brand new, pretty much the same exact thing as a $1,000 graphics card you spent, but except more powerful. Wow, Nvidia, great job. Now everyone's pretty much mad at Nvidia right now. Obviously, this doesn't pretty much hurt their sales, as they're still doing well and pretty much still dominating the GPU market. Oh goodness, Nvidia, what have you done? Okay, so this brings us to our final topic, the Samsung Galaxy S8. I personally am an Apple fan. I use Apple, and I'm not hating on Android fans. I think Android's great. It has really gotten stable and really has gotten great in the past few years, and has definitely become a true competitor for Apple, especially Samsung. Samsung has done a nice job competing with Apple and improving, I would say, even more than an iPhone has. But I just love iOS, and I just love Apple products, and I just love the iPhone. So I'm just gonna stick the iPhone. You people can stick with your Samsung and your Androids and your LGs and your Huaweis. You guys can stick with that. I'll stick with my iPhone. But I think everyone, even Apple fans, rejoiced by Apple's competitor and what they announced, the Samsung Galaxy S8. And the reason why I love competitors like Samsung is because now, with their innovation in technology, they will be able to push Apple to actually start catching up. If Apple dominated the industry without really changing anything, then we'd have a pretty boring iPhone. Now, this pushes Apple to change things and actually start improving their phones a lot quicker than before. So, the Samsung Galaxy S8 features the quote-unquote infinity screen, as Samsung themselves calls it, the infinity display or infinity screen. It is basically edge to edge, from left to right, and there's no bezels on the side, which means your screen just basically wraps around the entire left and right edge of your phone. It looks really good, I gotta admit. It looks just a really nice display. Now, this also moves the camera a little bit higher up, and the screen is probably the biggest screen I've ever seen on a phone. Imagine a few years where we're going to have screens that completely cover the front. That will be crazy. But it features an iris scanner, and people have been complaining about it, but they moved the Touch ID or the touch sensor for your fingerprint on the back. And people have saying that's uncomfortable to get to. But the reason why Samsung did that, and Samsung admitted it themselves, is because they want people using the iris scanner and all the other technology that people can use to log on to their Samsung Galaxy S8s instead of using the old, out-of-date touch sensor. Who needs that fingerprint sensor anymore? Now, Samsung is known for keeping physical buttons as used for like a home button, compared to all the other Android makers that don't even have any more home buttons. They use the digital ones implanted in Android, which you guys have probably seen those Android users that have those physical buttons. This year, Samsung has finally decided to copy, or should I say bootleg, all of the other brands by actually removing their home button, and this actually makes some people rejoice, because they just basically take some of the inspiration from the iPhone 7 that includes no home button, but that little haptic engine. They put that slightly at the bottom of the screen, so it actually feels like real buttons when you're pressing these digital buttons. It's pretty cool idea, Samsung, and it seems pretty cool. So in my opinion, I'm not going to get the Samsung Galaxy S8, but it seems like a pretty cool device. It is The Samsung Galaxy S8 has 3,000 milliamp hour battery, lithium ion. Once again, they promise to make better batteries that won't explode. If you guys probably see that trending YouTube video. The Samsung Galaxy S8 Plus includes, I think, a 3,500 milliamp hour battery, which is obviously longer lasting compared to the S8. And of course, the S8 Plus is bigger. So, with that note, it is time to end the Tag Podcast here. I hope you all enjoyed this Tag Podcast. I'm Ricky Sean too. You guys go ahead and I'll leave Renzo Gaming's channel in the description. You guys can go spam to come back from his hiatus and start doing another Tag Podcast with me. Hope you guys all enjoyed this Tag Podcast. I'm Ricky Sean too. See you guys in a month with the next Tag Podcast, the Tech and Gaming Podcast. Now, go out there, go play some more video games, and enjoy your technology. And I'll see you guys in the next episode. Peace out.